Excommunicado is now in effect.
I just saw Chad Stahelski's new film, John Wick 3 Parabellum, starring Keanu Reeves, and it was pretty good, on the verge of great, but it doesn't quite get there. Part of what makes John Wick so good is just how fitting it is to have Keanu Reeves be the main character in this story. He just has a certain charisma that a lot of other actors couldn't pull off in this role, or at least in my opinion. Additionally, it's easy to look away from logical problems in this when the action's so cool on screen. I think John Wick 3 is a perfect example of this, as there's a lot of issues I had with it, but at the same time, what they're putting on screen is great. The returning cast in this is rather good. Ian McShane and Lawrence Fishburne both are great reprising their roles, but I think the particular standout is Lance Reddick. He has been terrific in these films, and I just love his character and how he plays him. I wasn't too keen on all the additions that they added though in the new cast. For one, Asia Kate Dillon wasn't the best, and oftentimes I found their scenes to be derailing of what's actually going on in the story. Angelica Hudson was fine, but nothing too stellar. Jerome Flynn was pretty good, and it was a nice little wink and a nod at a certain show. Halle Berry was pretty good. I don't know if it was her work with Kidnap, but she was solid in the action scenes. I did find Mark Dacascos to be a little bit frustrating at times, as he plays an interesting villain in this, but not one I can completely get behind, as some scenes just feel awkward or stilted, and not necessarily someone I can completely get behind performance-wise. Yayan Ruhian and Sasep Arif Rahman were both really solid in this and provided stellar action performances. Actually, it was kind of detracting for the major scene they were in, as a certain other actor just wasn't at par with the physical performance that those two are able to give. I mean, their performances in the Raid films are some of the best physical performances in any martial arts movies ever. I think the overall story in this film is still good. They were wise in not diving too hard into the actual story behind John Wick. They still provide other hints. I think part of the fun with John Wick is rather than just be like, hey, here's the story, here's what happened, they just sprinkle little hints of things. There's coins, we don't know where they came from, we don't know why they exist, and there's a lot of different other things like that. You know, the hotels, the different people, the libraries, all these different things don't need to be explained. It's just a nice universe that they've built that I enjoy going back to. Additionally, I will say the comedy in this is pretty good, surprisingly. I thought certain jokes worked really well and other jokes sort of detracted from the scenes. And I think by upping the comedy, they leaned a little bit away from what I enjoyed about the very first John Wick. Additionally, there's one scene that I think just didn't have the visual flair that I'm used to with these films, as it just sort of feels awkward in the editing or something, where it's not as kinetic as it normally is. That's not to say it's bad or even not good, but it's just not great like the rest of the films I've seen. However, there is a moment in this film where it gets great and it returns to form, and then it had me back on board. I'm going to give John Wick a solid 7, leaning a little bit towards 8. I think this film is the third best in the series, and I say third best because that's a compliment. These films are great. I love how definitive the first one is. The second one's really good with some stellar action scenes, and I think the third one's similar in some regards. But I think part of my bias is that I was hearing people talk about this like they were talking about Mission Impossible Fallout. And the same thing happened last year where Mission Impossible Fallout was hyped so much that when I got to it, I just didn't see the same thing people saw. And I think that's similar here because people are saying this was the best John Wick. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I could see someone loving this way more than the first two. Hey guys, this week on All That Films podcast, we will be talking best action films of the 2010s. So all three, John Wick 1, 2, and 3 can be discussed. We will be discussing a little bit of Keanu Reeves in some segments, action movies you should see, and other things along those lines. Winner of Best 2000s Action Film will get an automatic bid in our 2000s Decade in Review tourney that we're having at the end of the year. So make sure to tune in to see who makes the cut.